Exactly, yeah.
Graded or pointy. You know what I mean? So you know if it's good or not.
Exactly. And then if it's not, you can obviously fix it for tonight.
Like
That's
on
awesome.
what you want to do. If you want just like a basic Swedish massage, like, and you come to my house or
Okay.
your house.
Let's get back a couple more examples. I've not seen it, but I hear people writing and reading about the movie Enchanted.
Oh.
You know, if college students go to see that or
The
not.
fairy tale comes in the
Yeah.
It's really good.
Now,
I'm so gripped.
Patrick Dempsey.
from the perspective of communication theory,
Adrian didn't laugh. She was just smiling. She was just smiling at my beautiful good looks. That's all.
there's something very interesting about the movie. And if you read any of the reviews about it, they will tell you that this movie, Enchanted, has all kinds of elements in it from other movies. Like Snow White, like Cinderella, like...
Lady in the Tramp.
Is it? I don't know. Beauty and the Beast.
Little Mermaid.
I don't even know if this is in the movie. I'm just going
Well, if you read it, there are all kinds of connections. For instance, one of the ones I was reading about was, is there some Back to the Future in
Oh,
it?
she's coming back. Isn't
Okay.
she's from the past.
Right,
She's lasted until today.
From a fairy tale world.
I just want
right.
For a fairy tale.
From Roger Rabbit. There's some Roger Rabbit in it. All right, now, I don't think there's any of that in it. Now,
It's that I would assume. I haven't seen
the symbols in here come from all of the meanings that symbols took on in these movies. But these movies, the symbols came from other places already. So if you wanted to do a semiotic deconstruction of the movie Enchanted, which is what a lot of people are starting to do now, what they're doing is they're tracing chains of signifiers about what this shoe means. Well, this shoe is actually a signifier of this other movie, what it meant in that movie, which came from a signifier of some other cultural history. So if you were looking for those chains of signifiers that are all leading in to this, that would be a good example of it. And this is something called intertextuality, where a given text is actually a compilation of all kinds of parts of other texts that already existed. And it comes to give some, it gives something from the glass slipper, it gives it its own new meaning now in this new context, which is likely at some future point to get used in another movie or something. So it all can be taken apart and traced back. The symbols can all be traced back and back to where they began to have their signification. So where did it start? So you can trace those back. So this is an example of intertextuality. What some people start talking about as hyper reality. Cultural studies would talk about this. In a hyper reality situation, you're at a point where it's so far removed from the original that people believe the new sign rather than the original. So an example of this is in the telenovela. Remember I was telling you about the telenovelas? Let me check the camera. Excuse me. Yep. Remember I was telling you about the Mexican telenovela research where they, a woman down in Texas worked with some Mexican-American teenagers to figure out when they watch a Mexican telenovela, what do they do with it? How does it affect them. And she found that they use it to talk with each other about their own struggles to be Mexican American. So it served for them. And in the Mexican telenovelas, there would be examples of country people, of native Mexicans. And they would be depicted a certain way. And so when these girls would go to Mexico then and see real native Mexicans, they would say, oh, they're not real native Mexicans because they don't look like the telenovelas. So that became more real to them than reality. So it became hyper reality. Cultural studies would look at this with the Pirates of the Caribbean enterprise. You know, the Johnny Depp and the whole Pirates of the Caribbean thing. You can trace back where pirate talk came from. You know, there was a day, right? What day was it this last couple of months? It was Talk Like a Pirate Day. Didn't do it.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, anyway, it was Talk Like a Pirate Day. Is it? Thank you very much. And
I knew you knew.
but that's a signifier of something. And you can trace it back to one of the original movies of Treasure Island, where one actor talked like that. And that became then, he just did it, and then it became a signifier of pirateness, and then it became picked up by other people, and it's totally removed from its original case.
Was it Errol Flynn?
I don't remember who it was. But,
It was a good old pirate.
yeah, so...
So are you saying that pirates didn't necessarily talk like that?
Believe it or not, yes, it's probably true that pirates did not talk like that. Right. One actor in one movie talked that way, so it became a hyper reality. So pirates now come, you say pirates, and what's the signifier that comes to people's minds? Or Johnny Depp, right? And so when you look at news then about the Somalia pirates off the coast of Somalia who are hijacking cargo ships and shooting rocket-propelled grenades into cruise ships that sail by. Yeah, yeah, this is the case. The United States Navy just went in and got out some Korean freighters that they had taken over. So you look at that and you're like, well, that's not pirates. These Johnny Depp is pirates. These guys are not.
Those not ours.
That's not our pirates, right? So it's a hyper reality. So communication studies can say something about this. You know, we have language to describe it. We can talk about what's going on. So you can talk about pirates and Enchanted and golden glass slippers and all that stuff.
So that would be basically a meta-communication, because it's a study about their...
Yes, we're doing meta-communication when we talk about how these symbols get used in society. Right. All right, here's another case study. A couple of you wrote, both in this class and in the graduate class, a couple of you wrote that you've noticed as the course went on that there are some relationships you have that you feel like you don't have as much power as the other person. And a number of people wrote this, so it's no one in particular thing. And that they're kind of saying things and you're responding to them. So they set the tone and you follow it and what's going on in the relationship. Now, one of the theories we did talked about that, and it used a way of describing how you didn't need to continue in that pattern. And that instead of just going through where they say, well, this, they say something, well, we'll do this, and you say, okay, we'll do that. And then they say, well, and make sure you do this, and we say, okay, I'll do that. Does anyone remember what theory this was? Okay, this is interactive, Watzlawick, interactional approach. This is what Slawik, and he talked about the one up, one down progression. So some people went and they started to diagram their conversations with people. And they began to discover, wow, I'm always accepting a one down role in this relationship. They ask me questions and I answer their questions. And they ask me more questions and I answer their questions. And so they began then to restructure their relationship. So if someone said, well, where did you go yesterday? They would say, well, why is that important to you?
That makes me mad.
Well, but what does that do? It breaks this, well, it's not monotony, it's a power issue. Who's in charge of the conversation? And so people, a number of people learned to take charge of their conversations and shift it so that someone said, well, where were you? And I said, well, why is that important to you? Well, and then you see, then they're answering your question instead of you answering their question.
Is this the hungry thing again?
Yeah.
Well, they could be related. This is actually not. This is Watzlawick. And he had 5 axioms of communication. This is the one you cannot not communicate, that everything communicates. And so this was nice. I was very glad to see these reflections come in, where people felt empowered to get out of unhappy kinds of relationships and start to be more assertive, or at least make a decision about whether I want to always be in the one down position. This is the interaction. This is chapter 12. What's that? Interactional view. Watzlawick. And he said, one of his theorems is that all communication is either symmetrical or complementary.
Symmetrical or complementary?
Yes. So this is complementary. One goes up, one goes down. They complement, they fit together. You know, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. One it curves this way and the other one fits onto it. It's complementary. If it's symmetrical, they're the same.
How do you have a conversation being symmetrical?
Well, you don't have long conversations being symmetrical. So if I say to you, where were you? And you say, well, why is that important to you? And then I say, well, how dare you say something like that to me? And then you say, well, I have every right to ask you that question. We're in a symmetrical conversation.
So not really productive.
It can, you know, it depends how you punctuate. Remember, we talk about punctuation here. Where does it start? Where does it end? But here's another example of a symmetrical conversation. Where do you want to go to eat? I don't know. Where do you want to go to eat? I don't know. You know, what do you want to do? I don't know. Well, what do you want? Well, we could do this. Yeah, or well, I don't know. We could do this.
Did you ever see that movie Marty?
No.
Watch Marty with Ernest Borgnine.
That's symmetrical.
The whole thing about that.
Conversation, though. That's everyone is trying to give the other person the responsibility for making a decision. Right? Everyone's trying to give the other person the responsibility.
The Jungle Book with the vulture sitting on the tree going, I don't know, what are you going to do? You've all seen it.
They're having a. I gotta get some film clips for this. Yeah. So these are symmetrical conversation, and then he talks about one across where it doesn't answer the question but moves in a new direction. So it's when you say, "Gee, it's a nice day out, isn't it?" You know, because you don't want to keep going where you're going, so you just. And then someone says, "You're trying to change the subject, aren't you?" Which is a up, and then you answer yes. Right. So
Why is that important to you?
why is that important to you? So, but what this theory does is it makes people alert to the patterns that they get into with other people. So if you were going to do a good reflection on this, see, that was a nice step. I mean, I was very pleased with that step for some people to recognize this. That was a good thing. The next step, though, to make this would have been to say, all right, Watzlawick's approach helps me to understand this. And he has 5 axioms of communication, and they're listed here. 1, cannot not communicate. Communication equals content plus the relationship. So it's not just what is said, it's the what kind of relationship exists. The nature of the relationship depends on how both parties punctuate. And then if you looked at each one of those a little bit in the particular case, that would have made a really deep, full kind of reflection on that. So you go the next step. You identify a theory that'll help. You look at some way it works. And then you go back and you look at the book. You pick out some things. And you use that to go through the incident that you're dealing with. So that's being more complete in your theoretical analysis and using the theory to describe it. Yeah, so to do that, we'd have to have more specifics about a particular case, about the relationship that exists, about the content that was said, about the symmetry or whether this, and about punctuation. When does this, where do you start the thinking about the incident? So punctuation was, the typical example of punctuation is one person says, I'm not comfortable with our relationship, I'm feeling distant, we need to talk. And the other person's like, well, everything feels fine to me, I don't know what's going on. And so then the other person pursues more, and the other person withdraws, and the other person pursues and withdraws. So you talk to people and you say, well, why do you withdraw? And they say, well, I withdraw because they're being really overbearing. And you talk to the other person and you say, well, why are you pursuing so much? And they say, well, it's because they're withdrawing. So who started it? That's the punctuation issue. Everyone thinks the other person started it. Well, I didn't start this. I'm just responding to what you did. You withdrew, so I pursued. Right. And the other person is saying, no, I didn't start this. You were just like so intense. I just withdrew. So punctuation becomes very important. And when you understand that you're punctuating, you're starting here, and the other person is starting to explain it here, you realize you're not going to get anywhere until you realize that and just change what's going on. So that's the punctuation issue. And so in this case, Prudence, this is where this theory not only describes it, but then it tells you how to transform it. By getting together and saying, a mediator would generally get people to say, all right, look, it doesn't matter who started it. What kind of relationship do you want? And you want this person to stop pursuing, you want this person to stop withdrawing. How are we going to do that? So you start without blaming each other. So this is Watzlawick's interactional view, which is very nice. There's a lot of good stuff in his theory. And CMM is very close to this. Coordinated management and meaning, again, borrows a lot of this kind of analysis. But a useful thing. So that was a nice reflection. Those of you who did that reflection, that was good. All right, another student wrote about Thanksgiving. It's Thanksgiving, right? A couple weeks ago, which means you got it together with a lot of people that you don't always get together with. And one of the students, not in this class, again, wrote about a family member coming back from a college, and I can name the college, you won't know, Norwich College up in Connecticut. It's a military college where you go, and it's like a whole the whole school is like ROTC. So everybody who's at Norwich is going to be a second lieutenant in the Army or some Navy or some branch of the military. So this has a whole culture to it. And then you have another student coming from a school called Montclair State University, which is kind of not like that, right? Right? And so Now, and then you get together with a couple other relatives in the house, and can you predict anything?
They might not be able to talk about college together.
Okay, so there's going to be some different experiences of college, and maybe different views about what college is about, that could lead to arguments, fights about what you're doing, what I'm doing. So it has a potential for conflict.
Mannerisms at the dinner table.
Yeah, right. Dinner manners. What else could be a tension?
I don't know. It is in my family. I have cousins in the army and stuff. They usually get more attention because they're serving the country.
Okay.
So they get like a higher status almost.
Okay, differential status.
No. Well, but it's like, oh, you're in the army, so it's like, you know, you get a different approach on things.
Okay. All right. So it'll reshape the patterns of interaction that take place here. While this person's away, the patterns will be one way. When this person comes back in, the patterns will shift.
Maybe there could be jealousy on either side.
Okay. So let's talk about, I'll write it down, jealousy, tension. All right, so what theories have we looked at that may talk about situations where a new part enters into a group and changes the interaction of a group? Okay, so there's we could think about adaptive structuration. There's also in Watzlawick, there's the systems end of it. It says that a system will arrange itself around the people who are part of the system. So if you pull one person, remember he gives that example in his story about the one child who's being a problem, right? So you got some interaction analysis here. That if you put a new part, so a lot of people wrote reflections about the fact that their family changes as one person goes back to college or another person gets married and moves out of the home. Everything shifts in the home when one person is moved out. And that's all an interaction analysis from Watzlawick's point of view. And we talked a little bit, I think we talked about Bowen. I mentioned to you Bowen theory, which is family systems theory. You can Google Bowen family systems, and you'll get the Georgetown Family Center down in Baltimore, Washington, or somewhere down there. And they do a lot of study about how families create their own problems together. Everybody participates. So it's very interesting. How about speech codes? Remember we did something called speech codes theory? Teamsterville. Is it likely that this person coming from Norwich has a certain set of speech codes? You know, ways you talk. Yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am. Right? They've got a speech code that they're going to use and expect to use in this setting. And there will be things that other people will do and say that will mean something different to this person. Right? So you've got speech codes theory, you've got adaptive structuration. Adaptive structuration probably is not the best one to use here. You might get something out of it because if you think of the work of getting everything ready, then that's mostly for work groups. So if you think of this family as working to get the Thanksgiving meal together, you could look at how it adapts. But I would go with interaction theory, and I would go with speech codes.
Could even be standpoint.
Yes, right, there's another one. Standpoint theory, that your experiences give you a different outlook What was some of the points of speech, of standpoint theory? People who are on the margins and oppressed, what is the deal with their standpoints?
They see things more realistically,
Why do they see things more realistically?
they're closer to real.
Well, because they have to take into account other perspectives in order to function. The people in power don't have to take into account their other perspectives, but people who are oppressed and marginalized have to take into account other perspectives. So they have more, right, and the argument is they have more contact with reality.
Right. But I'm just saying, like, something that goes along with that too is age. Because like at that one table, you have the old man who's 91 years old and my son who's like 24 years old, and it's like, you know what I mean? You're afraid of what the dynamic is going to be because he's all uppity and been in World War II and thinks he knows it all, and
Right.
doesn't give the kid a chance.
Right. So you've got this complex interactive system going on.
Is that the one, the interactional view, or which one is that?
Which one?
The one slip, or?
Well, that's where he calls the family as a system, page 176 in your book.
Okay.
That's, see, Watzlawick has kind of two sections to his thing.
Okay.
The family system one is the one where he talks about it as like a mobile hanging from the ceiling where everything balances. So from Watzlawick's view, what's going to happen here is that there will be a general overall goal called have a good Thanksgiving. Right? That's the good. That's the overall goal. Don't throw things, don't yell at each other, don't have fights about politics. Have a happy Thanksgiving meal. That's the goal. And so in order for that to happen, everybody has to participate in a certain way. And so Watzlawick says there will be pressures and messages sent for people to, if someone gets out of line with that, there will be messages sent to, hey, you need to do this or you need to do that. Why? To get into the right place so that our system creates what we want it to create.
Because I remember telling this son, keep your mouth shut and don't start any arguments.
There you go.
But then I heard him in the room, in the next room, which was very good. The father-in-law said something to him, and he said, "Hey, Pop, remember it's Happy Thanksgiving. Let's keep things happy," as opposed to saying, you know, you could have said something else.
Right. So you gave a one-up message. Remember, don't get in any arguments. So Pop says something that is provoking, and the son does a transitional message. Hey, remember, well, I'm not going to address that question. I'm just going to go in a transition to say, remember, it's Happy Thanksgiving. Let's keep it happy. So the system wants to, we used a word for when a system wants to be stable. Anybody remember what that word was? Homeostasis, right. Systems tend to seek stability, homeostasis. And Watzlawick doesn't go into it as much as, or this book doesn't go, but there's a whole science to how people all are accountable for what happens in a group. But even the people who keep silent and withdraw have an influence on the group. And adaptive structuration talked about that too. Right? So there's a lot of analysis we could do. So in this case, you're a comm studies major. You're going to go home to this setting for Thanksgiving. So all these theories give you a whole lot of things that you can predict, right? Theory helps you predict. I can predict that there's going to be different speech codes. There's likely to be conflicts because I'll talk a different way than my brother from Norwich will talk. There'll be a bunch of other people. We'll create a system. There will be a goal. The system will want to maintain that goal. There'll be communication that could disrupt that goal. There'll be other messages that can bring it back in line. And adaptive structuration says, even if there are traditions, I have the opportunity to change those traditions, to influence those traditions. So if it's a tradition everybody sits down and watches something on TV, I might say, hey, let's go outside and do this. Or so I can change some of the things. I have some power to change some things. Standpoint that they're experiencing, especially when this person comes back after 2 years in Iraq soon. I mean, that was in the student's reflection, that this person is ready to graduate, and so they're going to be getting commissioned and going over. And then when they come back for Thanksgiving in 2 years, it's going